I'm starting. Hello, everybody. Thank you very much for coming here to listen to this talk. It's a management talk. And today, it's actually a story. And I'm going to speak about feature teams and component ownership and inner sourcing in feature teams. So maybe you find yourself familiar with this story, and maybe you find some pieces that you have also lived yourself. OK, let's start. So our story starts with Helen. And Helen is a working mom. So Helen works 40, 50 hours a week. But also she has 2 kids. And every Saturday morning, she has to go and buy the groceries for the family. Now she has to drive, let's say, 2-3 hours through the traffic. And then she has to find parking. And then she has to fight through the crowd in the supermarket. Kids are shouting for groceries, whatever. And then she has to drive back through the traffic again and again find parking. So then she has to maybe rest the whole afternoon of Saturday because the Saturday is destroyed. Now Helen is an entrepreneur, and she said, okay, what about if there was a software that I could click on the items that I want to buy, and then there's a service that these items are brought to my house? And this is how online delivery was born. So I'm Thanassis Bantios, I'm VP of Engineering at T-Foods, and this is exactly what we do. We bring food and coffee and groceries to people's houses, and in general, I think it's a very useful service. So Helen, as I said, she's an entrepreneur, so she gathers an initial team, she gets funding, very small team, she acts as the PM of the team, and she hires a backend engineer, an iOS engineer, Android engineer, etc., because people are ordering from many platforms. Now, at this stage, communication is very easy. That's a startup, right? You want to do a feature, you just communicate, you storm in a room or a virtual room, and communication is easy. Now, business is going well, so Helen comes to the team and says, hey, we got more money, let's hire some more developers to do some more features. Nice. So now, the backend engineer hires some backend engineers, the iOS engineer, some iOS engineers, etc. And by the way, these people become engineering managers, whether they want it or not. And we have a picture like that with small functional teams. Now, this still works. It's a little bit, communication a little bit more messy, but it still works. And what you see, the cubes that you see there are the components that each team owns. So, for example, the green cube is the Android component. Now, again, Helen comes and says, hey, we have more money, let's scale the team more. And they identify that the bottleneck is on the backend. So they hire more backend developers, and we have a picture like this. Now it's a little bit more messy because you cannot contribute so easy to the monolith that is the backend, right? So Helen goes online, blah, 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 they search, and they find that there's this wonderful thing called microservices. So they say, okay, let's split the monolith into services. So we have a picture like that. The orders service is out, and a small functional team is behind the service. And the menu service is also out of the monolith. Now, these are very critical services in our business, the menu service and the order service. And at this point, communication is almost impossible. It completely breaks down because a product manager comes with a feature and they have to communicate with what? 1, 2, 3, 4, 6 teams, right? In order to deliver that feature. So Helen again goes online or on ChatGPT or whatever and blah, blah, blah. She searches and she finds this wonderful thing called Agile. And Agile promises quick delivery and fast feedback. Hello, everybody. I see a lot of people just coming in. Thank you for joining. You are in the right moment. So we have this messy communication here, and she finds Agile. And Agile wants cross-functional teams. So Ellen gathers all the team and says, hey, let's do a restructure. And now we have this picture here. By the way, these people are the same as in the previous slide. And now this works. Why? Because each team has every craft needed to deliver their feature. They have backend developers, iOS developers, whatever. They're very fast, they're autonomous, and it works. But what happens to the components? The little pieces on the bottom right. In the previous slide, everyone was kind of caring about the components. Now, they kind of let them aside to cry. And this is the stage that I see many companies struggle with, and this is the talk about how to deal with component ownership when you have feature teams. Okay, I'm going to give you some tips and tricks from my experience. So first of all, what is a component? Many definitions, but let's stick to a piece of software that can be deployed autonomously. It can be a backend service, a client application, something that we can deploy as a unit. Do we need component ownership? Yes. There are people, managers that say, oh, we don't need it. Code does not need to be owned. I disagree personally. We need component ownership. Otherwise, when we work with feature teams, we may end up in a kind of a Frankenstein monster environment for our components. What are some component responsibilities? The component owners should care about the component health. They should define the target architecture of the component, if it's clean architecture or whatever else. They should do documentation. They should do the releases. They should be the source of truth for this component. And most importantly, they should do the code reviews for anyone wanting to contribute to this component. This is not an exhaustive list, right? You can add your own if you define your own component ownership. Who should own components? Well, definitely not individuals. Sometimes I hear, oh, Mike is owning this component, and I don't know, Peter is owning that component. Nice, but what happens if Peter leaves the company, right? Teams should always own components. That's a rule. Now, what kind of teams? So before going into that, let's dive a little deep into the org structure. This is a typical matrix org structure. Maybe you've seen this slide again. On the vertical axis, we have the cross-functional teams, and on the horizontal axis, we have what is called a chapter. And the chapter is people that belong to different teams, but they work on the same craft. So for example, the green horizontal line is the the Android chapter, and the chapter is kind of a virtual technical team. It has a chapter lead, which is usually a staff engineer, and they need to have their own time, maybe 20%, we're going to get into that later, to work on their own stuff. They use maybe, they meet every week, and they do their own stuff. Now, this matrix model was made famous by the company Spotify some years ago, and you may find it online as the Spotify model. It was used much before that, but Spotify made it famous. And it's 2025, and it still works. And I have to say here that the mother company that we belong to Delivery Hero, which is a global online delivery company, promotes that model for all of the verticals. It promotes it because it's just so handy. So now that we have the teams and the chapters, let's go into component ownership. Client components should be owned by the chapter. Why is that? Because they are one component that is deployed as one unit. Yeah, you can modularize it with frameworks in iOS and whatever, but in general, you want the chapters to own the client components. What about backend services? If the service is critical and it's on the critical path, you want the chapter to own it, not a team. Why is that? Because you want the knowledge to be spread among many engineers. You don't want a single team to own a very significant component like the menu service I talked before. Also, if you have on-call rotation, it makes on-call very handy. In this example here, we have 3 critical components, and the on-call rotation is between 12 people. So you are on call once every 12 weeks, which is manageable. If a team owns this component, then you are on call 1 every 3 weeks, which is messy for your personal life. If we have a non-critical component, then yes, of course, a team can own it. In our case, we have rating, for example. It's the ratings that you see when you go to order from a certain restaurant. If it breaks, yeah, not the best user experience, but you can still order and have some food and not die from starvation. So we can fix it the next day. So non-critical services can be owned by teams. Monoliths. This is a lightning talk, so I could dedicate a whole talk to how we own monoliths. I cannot dive deep here, but in general, monoliths cannot be owned by a certain team or chapter. You should expand the ownership in many chapters. And there are different techniques like AORs that we can talk. If you are interested in that topic, please come find me later. We have a booth on the first floor or what? The first floor. And you can also play a game in this booth and test your coding knowledge. It's a coding challenge. But in general, it's a very difficult topic. Now, this is probably the most important slide of the whole presentation. Use 20% of your time to work on component backlogs. If you don't do that in a feature teams environment, you're going to fail. There are a lot of companies that say, oh, we go to feature teams, and then they forget about components and the technical part of the equation. Each component should have a backlog, very well groomed, like a real product backlog, and you should use 20% of your time either in your regular sprints, or sometimes we do a technical sprint where you just forget about the business and you dedicate 2 weeks on technical stuff. Do that. If you don't, you're going to run into problems. Now let's go to inner sourcing. What is inner sourcing? Inner sourcing is the rules and guidelines that enable anyone to contribute to any service within the company stack. Okay? Here we have an example. Team 1 owns, they need to develop a feature, and this feature needs code contribution in 2 of the components that the team owns, but also to a component that another team owns. So how do we do that? First of all, we want to do that. We don't want dependencies. We don't want the team 2 to develop these features, because then you have dependencies and you're not fast. The main idea is don't just stop an APR. Go talk to the team and explain, hey, we need to do this feature, and collaborate, design it together. Maybe they say, oh, we were thinking about something along those lines, and maybe let's do it together. Or they may guide you on how to do it, right? So don't just open APR. Now, this is especially advice for management. The most important thing if you want inner sourcing is to have everything standardized. Sometimes I hear like, oh, this service should be written in Python and this service in whatever language. That's good maybe for the technical side, but it hurts inner sourcing. What you want to do to scale is have everything standardized. Programming language, CI/CD, inner component, architecture, everything. So now, if I want to contribute to a team that to a component that I don't own, the only thing I need to understand is the business logic. Nothing else. Everything else is the same. And that's the real, let's say, trick to scale and move fast. And make services small. I cannot give you a rule here, but like ideally, you should be able to refactor a whole service in maybe 2 months. And yes, you may have more hops in terms of calls, but you will gain a lot of productivity in inner sourcing. Something that is good as an exercise is to rate all components based on an inner sourcing score. So how easy it is for me to contribute to another team's component. You can measure things like test coverage, documentation, health of code base, etc. Oops, that's a typo there, total. It should be total score. And then you measure a total score. And by the way, I just want to mention here that in Amazon, where one of my previous bosses worked, Paul, they had an internal program that incentivized this component score. So your team got actual money bonuses if the inner sourcing score was very high. Why? Because development is very fast, right? I don't say you do that unless you have a lot of money, but in general, you can also incentivize that. So that's the end of my talk. Hopefully I'm under 15 minutes. If I could wrap up the whole talk in one slide, component ownership is needed, especially if you work in feature teams. Client components should be owned by client chapters. Critical backend services should be owned by backend chapters. And non-critical backend services could be owned either by teams or chapters. You can define that. Embrace inner sourcing. If you're not doing it, it will make you very fast. But respect some rules that should guide the inner sourcing and standardize everything in the stack. Because then, like not only the stack, but also processes. That's also important, right? How we do a code review. Standardize that. So then if I want to contribute to another component, everything is the same. That's it for me today. Thank you. Questions, if we have any questions. Yes?
I have a question.
Yep, just 1 second. I'm going to pass the microphone across, and I'm going to answer from the other mic.
Okay. My question has to do with what you said about the language, that you need to standardize that. In bigger organization, it's difficult. If you have different requirements, you may have to have 2 or 3 languages. But if you have all the other things standardized, I don't think that this would be a problem.
Yeah, you're right. What you want is to maintain all parameters the standard. Now, if one parameter, the programming language, is not standard, then that's okay. But I'm just going to tell you one thing. This guy that I mentioned before, Paul Onen, he was a VP of engineering in Amazon, and then he was my boss for 2 years. And in Amazon, they had this, okay, every service should be the right technology, and now they're standardizing everything in Java. Why? Because they saw that the developer productivity that they gained is more important than the technology itself. But it's always a balance, right? There's no rule. If you can standardize everything and maybe keep the tool belt to 2 to 3 languages, that's fine.
Okay, thank you.
Other questions? No questions? Do I have more time, or I should get off the stage? Okay, quick quiz. Who is doing cross-functional teams? Okay, stay up, please. Okay, nice. Now, put your hand down if you're not doing component ownership. Okay, maybe you should try it then. Now, put your hand down if you're doing inner sourcing. Oh, okay. You win. I don't know where you work. Okay. Any benefits you find this talk, especially if you're doing feature teams and not component ownership? Anyone wants to share an opinion here? Yeah. Okay, nice.
That's the reason I'm here, because we don't have component ownership in general, only for some components. And we don't have standardization for everything, but for most of the things in some components. So for those that are not standardized, it's a real problem.
Yeah.
Because
I agree.
we are trying to find who can do something for that component. And that will take the most time rather than the development.
Rather than doing it. Okay, thank you very much. Let's go to the next talk.